and welcome to Zwei, Null, the TLG Gwent podcast. My name is Jaggeris, and I'm joined, as always, by the lovely Spiro. And today our guests are Radu Andrada and King Ches, the self-proclaimed king of Team Leviathan Gaming.
Hello.
Yeah, welcome everyone. We got some interesting stuff to talk about today with regards to the recent changes in Gwent. Obviously, we did actually get a fairly sizable balance change, and this is obviously proceeding, which is going to the upcoming expansion. I believe it's Place of Power. So there's some stuff to cover, and going to be exciting to go through.
Yeah, so I guess we should kick things off by talking about stratagems. We've got new stratagems. They're meant to be better than our old stratagems. Some of them probably are, some of them probably not so much. Let's start with Radu. How are you feeling in regard to new stratagems?
So for me, I only tried the Skellige one, and that one feels really strong right now. I'm excited to see some changes there because the old ones felt a little bit underpowered. So I'm not sure about you guys, but that one was kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, I like all the changes they've done to the stratagems because not only are they buffing up the ones that see like less play, but also I've been kind of feeling for a while that stratagems in a way feel a little bit power crept in a way, because if you think about it, back when Homecoming first came out, stratagems were like worth 5 points as tactical advantage, and the game has definitely gone up in power level, but stratagems have kind of stayed the same. So I kind of like that stratagems got a little bit stronger. Especially the ones that's seeing not so much play in the past, like, you know, Mask of Ouroboros and Urn of Shadows, especially. That one saw like 0 play. But yeah, quite nice to see them actually seeing some competitive play now, potentially.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Mask of Ouroboros is like auto-include. I don't think you'd ever not run it in SK at this point. Unless some sort of engine deck appears that really needs to protect something, but I just don't see it like you're only losing 1 point and like you get a thin, right, which is really nice, and often it can actually be worth more if you've got something in hand. I don't think you give it the points from the discard because like you're going to be able to discard that card later anyway, but like it is nice for sure. Probably the other most impactful one is Scroll, right? Like Scroll's actually really good in certain decks. For example, Vi, it's pretty good in. Not 100% sure. It depends on the meta whether or not you run it over something to protect the consume, but it's also pretty good. But what I have actually, I tried it today. I only played like 2 games, but it seemed to go pretty well. Was scrolling full test, because like Commando's decks really need to draw well round 1, right? So like it's really impactful in that deck. Now obviously you're giving up points, but a lot of the time you just like people pass really quickly anyway to stop you getting more carryover. So seems pretty good in Commandos too.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Are you guys concerned about the impact of more powerful stratagems on discrepancies between going first and going second? Because obviously, so we've seen stratagems get better, which may give certain advantages to going first. And obviously on ladder, you don't control when you go first and when you go second compared to on tournaments. Whereas on tournaments, you know, you kind of know when you're going to have your stratagem with which decks. And so you can strategize much more effectively around your coin flip. Do you think that this is going to have a positive impact, a negative impact? Because I feel like it's going to have an impact, you know, in some shape or form to the coin flip.
So I think I saw some stats from last season, and Red Coin had a better win rate, which means that buffing the stratagems for this season might balance that one out. That's on ladder.
Yeah, I feel like right now in a lot of matchups that can feel kind of bad, more so than the last couple of months going first. I think losing on even or being pressured, especially I think there was a lot more that had to do with Syndicate line pockets being quite strong. That was a very abusive red coin deck, and that might have actually skewed the red coin win rate on at least on pro ladder level. But it's an interesting one to think about, because at the one hand you want to make sure that players are on like an equal footing, so that, you know, the coin flip doesn't impact the outcome of the game as much. But on the other hand, if you also buff strategies too much, then winning round 1 becomes very easy. And some metas, going first is actually, or in some matchups at least, going first is actually beneficial, because it helps you secure round 1. And some decks that have round control are in a very, very dominant position, like V, for example, or some other decks. So there are definitely matchups where going first is beneficial, and some matchups where obviously going second is much better depending on the deck. So you got to be careful. You can't overbuff them, because if you overbuff them, it also is going to skew the gameplay too much. But if you underbuff them, again, it can skew it in the other direction too. So it's an interesting one to think about, and how exactly they're supposed to balance it can be quite challenging, I think.
Yeah, I tend to think like right now it seems okay. I think like it's hard to say what coin's better. It's all dependent on the meta, right? Like because it all depends upon like whether or not you need to win round one or not. And if you need to win round one, then blue coin's often like better, right? So it depends on the meta whether that's like a key factor in a lot of matchups or not. In terms of buffing the stratagems, I have no problems with them buffing like the underused ones and giving you more like variation in like being able to strengthen different strategies and things. That seems fine. But I'd be like hesitant to like buff them in terms of actual point generation for the time being. Obviously, as power creep kicks in, then you can consider it. But right now, it feels like it's reasonably okay to me where we're at.
I suppose it's one of these things where we won't really see the tournament impact until we actually have tournaments that utilize the new stratagems, you know, seeing how they impact upcoming qualifiers, for example, upcoming, you know, top 16, top 64 and beyond, because we haven't had a tournament that wasn't really everyone using what Crystal Skull and what's it? TA tactical advantage. So, you know, seeing their tournament impact, I think is hard to gauge at the moment, but I do think being able to build a deck which, you know, oh, I can play this on blue and I'll be able to use the stratagem, and I can use the stratagem in this way in this deck in round one every time, or, you know, that sort of thing, for whether it's a consistency stratagem, whether it's, you know, Nilfgaard having a guaranteed poison to pressure out the round. That is going to be interesting for me to see from a casting perspective, how the pro players utilize stratagems in their tournament decks rather than in their ladder decks, is what I would say.
Yeah, to add to that, it would be actually really cool to see, like, if they, especially if they open up like new strategies of how players queue the decks and the certain coins, because for the most part, as you mentioned, pretty much everyone, tactical advantage, crystal skull, sometimes maybe lamp, but for the most part, it's just 2 or 3 stratagems, and it just feels too auto-included. Whereas it'll be nice to see, like, if one deck is using this stratagem, another deck is using that stratagem, and this deck is using that stratagem in a creative way to like try and leverage this kind of advantage with this coin in this matchup. And you know, you could do some interesting things in potentially in tournament environments if those stratagems are utilized. Like we saw a big change in the meta when Crystal Skull was buffed. Like before then, it was everyone using TA or lamp, and then people started like taking against Nilfgaard or some poison matchups with the Crystal Skull stratagem, and it started changing some matchups and some instances in round one at least. And you know, you could get some more changes if you obviously introduce more playable stratagems into the meta.
And I guess speaking of the meta, that's probably where we should go next in terms of balance changes, the recent patch. Which changes do you think have had the biggest impact on the meta, and I guess why is then the follow up? You know, give us some thinking, some critical thought in your answers.
So I think the nerf to sackers is probably the most impactful thing that happened with this balance change, because now I'm not sure where Blind Pocket is in terms of a tier list. But you should definitely see less Syndicate on ladder, I think.
Yeah, I think Masquerade Ball is also a pretty big change, because Masquerade Ball has been pretty much like a crutch card in Nilfgaard since as long as I can remember. Like almost every deck Nilfgaard plays has been carried by Masquerade Ball for since Masquerade Ball's been introduced into the game, essentially. So, I mean, while Masquerade Ball still seems playable, it definitely has a big deck building cost now, and it's kind of thing that you got to think about. How much do you really want to put this ball in your deck nowadays? Because it's not as easy as it is in the past to proc it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the meta's still young, so it's hard to tell exactly like what's gonna happen. But like initial like feelings and stuff is that feels like Northern Realms is definitely playable this season, which you could argue it wasn't last season. I know a few people had good decent scores with it, but generally speaking, it felt slightly underpowered. Scoia'tael's probably going to be like on the weakest, like maybe not on the weakest side, because like people did really well with Scoia'tael last season, but it's going to be like a niche choice, I think, because like it's sort of very meta dependent, and it's also pretty hard to play at times. So, but then everything else seems pretty good. Like monsters is still probably the most flexible faction, and arguably now the strongest as well. I think Skellige got like quite a. It's interesting, right? Because they sort of nerfed Iced, but they gave him the stratagem, which is stronger. They gave him Coral, which is really strong now. So, and they also buffed Witcher SK. So, like SK's gone from being
And the
pretty
new
much
ability.
yeah, and a new leader ability. So I think SK is now the other super flexible faction with monsters. I think there's lots of things you can do in that faction. And then Syndicate also got some buffs. So like, I'm not sure. It's hard to tell how good that is now, but I know people are doing well with passy lists at the moment. Now, if that'll still be the case in a couple of weeks, it's to be seen. But Syndicate at least has some potential. And then Nilfgaard is a funny one because Ball, I think, is dead, but you still have like Cloggers, which saw some play. And you can always go back to like All In Assimilate that I actually tried today, and it seems okay. All In Assimilate's good when it's like very point spammy meta, right? And not much control.
Yeah, going
Which
back
it
to
is
the
right now.
Scoia'tael, I think that Shiru might start. Shiru decks could be good because there seems to be a somewhat decent amount of swarm, especially because of Faltus right now, being on ladder, and I have seen some congregates as well. So maybe Shiru decks might actually end up being a thing that Scoia'tael gravitates towards, depending how swarmy the meta ends up being.
I think the thing with Scoia'tael, right, is they'll play the same deck regardless, and they will tech Shiru is basically a tech card for that deck, right, whether it's swarmy or not. So, if it's swarmy, they tech in the Shiru. If not, they just take it out for some other Tor Punish or whatever. What I will say is I think AQ's actually fallen out a little bit at the moment because it seems to be a lot more Vi, as Vi punishes a lot of these like point spammy decks, right? It's like the ultimate point spam deck, and right now it's quite point spammy with both Syndicate and Ball disappearing. So
Yeah, I was going to touch on our favorite alphabetical insect that is VDEX, and that's a card that Shiro really doesn't do so well against. You know, oh, it's okay. I got a 6-point Shiro, and you got a 22-point V. Like, doesn't really work. I personally, I hate V with a passion. I feel like this is like my least favorite method because I hate when Skellige is good and I hate V. And this current method, Skellige is good and there is V. So it's like everything that I hate on ladder is currently like what's going on.
Is it possible that you just hate Gwent?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like you could ask that question to more or less any Gwent player at this stage, especially pro ladder player. I mean, how many games do you guys play a season? You know,
Too many, way too many.
6.
Actually, not enough. But probably enough for my mental health, but not enough for my skills.
No, I don't know. V in the meta is it's a first. I guess it's an odd one. Like we've had it in the meta before, and it was incredibly dominant. It's been nerfed a little bit, so they've brought it kind of more in line, and then it kind of fell off in previous seasons where people weren't doing so many kind of point slammy things, and now it's kind of back. But do you think it's back for good? Like, is it going to stay in the meta, or do you think it's just early meta where people are like, "Oh, I'm just going to go back to what was good"?
I think V will be around, and it's to me it's crazy how a deck that got, if you think about how much points V got nerfed by, and how good it still is, it's crazy. I don't think I've ever seen a deck in Gwent be nerfed that hard and still be good. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think because of how hard it was nerfed, people actually underrated it, right? Because it was like that nerf to it is enormous, but it actually just shows how good it was before. But the problem with Vi is, right, that no matter how much you like, well, obviously you can nerf it so it's unplayable, but right now it sort of has the same. It still plays the same as it did before. You either have the counters or you don't, right? A lot of the time. The exception being old school Passiflora, right, which could just outvalue you in round 1, like force you out with like a soul, and then beat you with engines in round 3. It's about the only deck that can beat you by just like having such greedy engines. But right now, the thing with Vi is that like people aren't expecting it too much because it didn't see a lot of play, so they haven't teched in their spores and stuff. But give it a week of being popular, and then everybody puts in a random spores in their deck, and then Vi struggles again, right? So it's a really weird swingy deck, I think. Vi, it's you've got to play it at the right times.
And I feel like part of the problem with it is that it then encourages things like Alchemist, right? it's one of those decks where you're like, well, if I could just get rid of V, like I'll just steal their V and I'll win that way. And then it encourages this kind of RNG strategy with things like the location, Nilfgaard, and all those kind of things, which, you know, we've seen them in tournaments, and that never feels good when someone wins because they just high rolled an alchemist.
Yeah.
I mean, the alchemist was being played because of the location most of the time. Not really many people actually like physically put an alchemist in their deck. It was just the flexibility of having off location, and because location helped with the Cantarella and the Joachims and blah blah blah. And because of that, people were very often going, well, I've got a dry pass in round 2. Guess I'm going to play an alchemist, or in some situations they use it as a win con. Maybe they have another win con they need to high roll and blah blah. But I don't think like alchemist is seeing that much play just to high roll, but it's just a byproduct of, you know, the location and having a nice convenient access to this card as well.
And realistically, Nilfgaard doesn't have to tech for Vi, right? Like, if you're playing that sort of deck, you probably got a bunch of Tor Punish anyway. And you've always got the, like, coup onto Quacks / Cantarella into Quacks, right? Which is game winning as well, so... yeah, I don't think Nilfgaard's the one that needs to worry about Vi, to be honest.
Speaking of Nilfgaard, what is the way to play Nilfgaard right now? I don't know if you guys have experimented with Nilfgaard at all. Have you seen any Nilfgaard decks on ladder? What are thoughts on Nilfgaard after the Spell nerf?
Well, I tried to build a soldier list because it felt like the Morven buff might be relevant, but I ended up trying to fit in bold and it didn't fucking work. So I don't know. I want to play the faction, but I'm waiting for someone else to come up with a good idea.
Just waiting for the meta report at this point.
You got any genius deck building?
I mean, I've always got genius deck building. No. I think soldiers is a big bait. Don't get baited, guys. Whilst I'm on the subject of soldiers, as it is my favorite deck of all time, if anybody from CDPR is watching, I have a simple change to make soldiers good. Just make Dairlan Foot Soldier 4P and add another high-end soldier, and then I could start thinking about it. But right now, like, the soldier bronzes are just so bad that you can't really do much with them. You could also just buff Dairlan, I guess, like 4 for 4, like 4 creator 4. But yeah. In terms of Nilfgaard, I think Clog is playable, which is really sad. Hate that deck. Don't play it, kids, but if you need to play Nilfgaard, then play Clog, I guess. But yeah, feels bad. I know Spessy played like double Maddock, which probably is somewhat playable. I don't see why that would be any worse this season. But personally, I have actually tried. I've played some Assimilate, like all in Assimilate with Portal and stuff, and yeah, seems pretty good. Like I think I'm like 4-1 with it, something like that. Not like a big sample size or anything, but it feels reasonably good. It was strong before like the recent ball deck came around, right? So should be okay, I think. I don't know if it's going to be tier 1 or anything, but it's wholesome fun with lots of engines, so seems good.
I feel like part of the problem with Nilfgaard is that mostly what CDPR do with Nilfgaard is they take away. Like, very occasionally they'll be like, right, let's add some stuff. And they add things like Masquerade Bull. They add things like Usurper. Like, just cards that are generally good. They add things like Brathens. You know, there's just these cards you could just throw in any deck and they're generally good. They don't really seem to add synergistic cards often for things like Assimilate, for things like soldiers, like we've been talking about. And then what happens is they add enough good stuff that Nilfgaard becomes good. And then they just have to keep taking away good stuff to the point where Nilfgaard is terrible again. And we're at that point now with the Masquerade Ball changes, for example, with the Aristocrats, where they're like, oh, you know, people keep complaining about this, and people don't like Nilfgaard because it's annoying, and we want people to like our game. So let's just take it away. We'll just take it away. We won't really give them anything in return. We're just going to take this away, and then we'll see what happens. And then maybe in a few months when the people they've forgotten that they hate Nilfgaard, you know, we'll wait till everyone forgets they hate Nilfgaard, and then we'll give it some more stuff. And that seems to be the patch cycle of Nilfgaard.
Yeah, the problem they have with Nilfgaard, right, is Nilfgaard is the number one faction, right? It's if you ever do a poll on what's people's favorite faction, it'll get the highest score. The problem with that is that everybody who doesn't like Nilfgaard, which is a bigger proportion, Nilfgaard's like one of their least favorite factions, right? So you have like they want to please these people because it's like the most popular faction, but then over 50% of the population don't like Nilfgaard, right? Because it's not their favorite faction. And the other thing is like they've made Nilfgaard out to be this control archetype with absolutely no alternative apart from Assimilate right now, right? Assimilate's the non-control version of Nilfgaard. And nobody ever complains about Assimilate, right? Like I don't think I've ever heard anybody complain, "Oh no, Assimilate." And the reason is that it's not touching your stuff, right? It's like doing its own thing. And what they could do is make soldiers good, like make an actual soldier swarm deck, right? Like they could do something like that, like they had in open beta. But it seems like they want to try and give Nilfgaard this identity of being unfun to play against, and it just results in this cycle, like you described, of buff it, nerf it, rather than just like let it sit for a while, right? With some other playable archetypes.
So just think that no one complained about Assimilate, but are you forgetting about Create and Bribery and all those things?
Yeah, but that wasn't Assimilate, right? That was like
mean-
just high roll in Bribery when it wasn't actually Assimilate. It was just like a few Create cards have been moaned about, but Assimilate itself is less complained about, I would say.
I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I would just love factions to not have be crutched on like by certain cards, like Masquerade. But there's so many other things you could do with Nilfgaard, but a lot of the time it always just falls. And it's kind of funny how people have desperately they build a deck with Nilfgaard and they're like, you know what this deck needs? It needs a ball, and they just find a way to put a ball in. Like you play a full-on Assimilate deck, and then you go, you know what this deck needs? We need a Masquerade ball. Even if there's only 2 aristocrats that proc the ball, be it Roderick and Joachim, they're like, you know what? Ball's too good to cut. Putting ball in this deck, and that's what always happens. Like eventually, Nilfgaard devolves to a Masquerade ball deck in some way or the other, and that's been something I have not liked about Nilfgaard, is how powerful Masquerade ball has forced deck building in a way that doesn't feel very fun to build decks in Nilfgaard.
But honestly, like that's a problem with Gwent, and I think Tailbot touched on it on an interview somebody did with him. That like the one thing he wants to see more than anything is bronze cards be lifted up, right? Because right now games come down to how many gold cards can you draw in round 3 a lot of the time, right? Like, and it's because it's not like in open beta, decks revolved around bronze synergies with gold, like tech cards, basically a gold suite of tech cards. Whereas it's gone the other way around now, right? Like you want to run these bronze tech cards and win with just having gold hands, which I personally tend to agree with Tailbot. Like I would rather have a lot of synergy coming from your bronze, and something like Witcher NR is a good example of how you can do it, right? Like Witcher NR, whilst when it first came out was probably a little too strong, it is very synergistic in its bronzes with more sort of techie gold cards. Like you run a Geralt or vanilla Geralt or Jurden or something like that. You can run some locks sort of thing. But yeah, I think.
Yep.
I think that's how I would like them to go, but I'm not sure that they are going to go that way.
And
Yeah,
I think that's something we see with Skellige, right? Skellige, a lot of their bronzes are decent, especially with this whole veteran thing in round 3. Like, part of what made Warriors good is that the bronze package is all right. It's not where it needs to be. It still relies on golds, but I think like power creeping the bronzes would really help the game.
Yeah, like the thing Warriors had, right, was it had bronzes that were playing for like insane value a few seasons ago, but right now it's still how many gold cards can I draw in round 3 right, at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, touching on what Ches mentioned about bronze cards being stronger, it's something it's actually interesting because very often we have these bronze cards that actually end up being like stronger than others, like be it Villager, the Skellige card, the one that puts bleed on your allied unit, or Safecrack or whatever. And quite often people tend to like really get upset when like one bronze card is playing for higher value than others. And I like me personally, I think that Safecracker was fine. That other bronze cards should be like Safecracker, cards that you want, that are part of your strategy, cards that your deck you're happy to see. You're not just mulling away Safecrackers. They're good cards in your deck. You want them. Like I would love it if all decks had cards like that. The reason why everyone complained about Safecrackers though is because Safecrackers was stronger than all the other bronzes, which is not to say that Safecrackers was bad. It's just that other bronze cards should be on that kind of level, which I would love to see more of.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think
and it's one of these situations where they could just do a pass, you know, and add 2 points here, 3 points here, whatever to bronze cards, and just tweak the numbers. But then at the same time, it's like you then have these gold cards that are just completely massive swing cards, and you need to think about how it all fits together. And the other concern I would say with adjusting bronzes is Syndicate's in a bit of a difficult position because their coin purse is capped at 9. So you might get to the power creep stage where Syndicate cards, you can't make them generate any more money because you're just going to overprofit, so they're not counting for points. And that then becomes a problem with that faction.
I have a hot take on Syndicate.
Let's hear
Delete
it.
the coin mechanic. Get rid of it.
I don't think that's going to be possible at this point.
Actually hate coins. Get rid of them. Non-interactive. Storing carryover. It's just everything that's kind of bad, right? And people like it because it's new and fancy, but realistically I think it's just a bad mechanic personally.
Okay, so if you get rid of it, then what do you do to Syndicate?
I mean, they have to just rework a lot of it, right? But that's, I mean, it's never going to happen, so there's no point in me putting any thought into it. But
there's just too many cards that have coin.
Yeah, they could just like rework it and have it as like, I don't know, like a shady faction that does shady things, right? Like, but
so Nilfgaard.
Yeah, like, and then Nilfgaard can be less shady, right? Like, you can.
And everyone can hate Syndicate instead.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
That totally fixes the problem by taking it from here and putting it over here.
I mean,
it's just like,
you
look
could
over
just share
there,
it out,
there's
right?
the problem
No,
now.
You could share it out, so like both of them have shady stuff in them, and then you can also have like Swarm Syndicate, right? And Swarm and NG. So they both have some shady stuff and some non-shady stuff.
Oh boy. Yep, that's a take.
I really want to see a dev stream done exclusively by Chezzy, explaining the changes that are being made and why they're being made. Like, right, we decided that coins are garbage, so we just removed them completely from the game. But on the plus side, now you can touch their stuff. You know, it's all good.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, we made this new soldier card, and we buffed Dailerand soldiers up to 4 points. So now soldiers are key.
Yeah. What we did was we changed Reemdy into something else, and into a create a soldier card. We gave his old ability where he buffs all the soldiers back to Sentry and turns Sentry into a Nilfgaard card, and buffed Dailerand foot soldiers to 4p 4 strength. Yeah, that's good. That's the patch notes by King Chess.
Jay just wants to play some soldiers again. That's all Jay's want. Actually, you getting soldiers, then I want my great swords back. Give me my old great swords.
Yeah, I mean that's fine by me. Bring back open beta, right? Just bring back all those decks just in the current with the current like UI and everything, right? It would be great.
And let's add faction abilities back while we're at it. So you know you have
No. That wasn't in the game. Right?
Let's do that, and let's make gold cards uninteractable, and let's add silver cards to the mix just to fuck things up.
We can go Silver Spice. That's fine.
Silver Spice and like the Silver Mages, you know, the ones that were like, I can make clear skies and do 2 other things. One of which is probably Alzur's Thunder.
True.
Manamon and Death Mold, those cards.
Do you not feel like now we're like the back in our day? This podcast has devolved into like geriatric. Like, back in my day, you could do this, and you could do this, and we had to do this, and the board looked absolute garbage. And old Gwent board was terrible. Okay, so let's talk esports. Let's talk Gwent Open number 1. So Gwent Open number 1 was last month with Tailbot reigning supreme. How did you guys feel about the tournament meta in Open 1? And like last tournament meta, I guess. Do you think it was a healthy meta for that tournament, or do you feel like there were problems?
I mean, it was very similar to what we've seen. There hasn't been much changes in the last month, so it's been pretty much the same type of meta we've seen in the qualifiers. Nothing really too unusual happened. In terms of how I felt about the meta, I don't know. There didn't seem like there was much room for experimentation for. I must say, in terms of this tournament meta, the previous one we had, it's probably one of the tournament, the time periods of Gwent where I've seen like the least amount of like a real innovation in terms of like decks being brought in qualifiers and opens and stuff. There was some tech cards here and there, but that's all that really changed was some tech cards. There weren't like any decks you go, oh, that's an interesting deck. I want to try that on ladder or anything like that. It was just very much same old Lion Pockets, a Ruckus Swarm, some Bee, some Kelly, some the same kind of stuff over and over.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the tournament, I think it was one of the most like predictable lineups people brought for a long time. Mainly because meta had been the same for like 2 months right at that point, and we'd had like 4 online qualifiers had taken place at that point. I think. And yeah, like so it wasn't particularly innovative. I think a lot of the gameplay was very good, which was nice. It was nice to see both Padge and Tailbot make the final, so it shows like the heavy hitters are making it to the final. So as much as we do read about RNG and stuff, it seems like a lot of the big hitters are getting to these finals and things, being rewarded for good play. And realistically, if you actually look at the Open, pretty much everybody who was at that Open was also like it was 8 of the very best players. Maybe there was 1 or 2 who they're like a question mark over whether or not they're like a top player, but generally speaking, it looks like last patch's tournament meta favored clean play, which is nice. Having said that, I was a little disappointed not to see a little bit more experimentation in tournament lineup. Maybe because it was the tried and tested players making it to the Open. But like, I don't think anybody brought a Vi to the Open.
Oh, you're so sad about that, aren't you?
Yeah, but like Vi does let you do some interesting stuff, right? Because you'd have to ban Nilfgaard, and I think most people went with the let's ban line pockets and be good into Nilfgaard, right? And to be fair, Nilfgaard massively underperformed in the Open, so it's probably a decent idea. But you could have done some interesting stuff, I think, or at least had a go at it. Like it doesn't even have to work. It would have just been nice to see some of it. But I think this patch is going to be good, right? Because it's a brand new patch and decks have changed. So looking forward to seeing how the tournament meta develops going forward this patch.
And Rada, obviously you were playing in the qualifiers. I believe you made it to day 2. So how did you find the tour meta? Did you find that you were quite limited on your deck choices, especially making it to day 2 and you got to choose like 3 different or 4 different decks? Or how did you find the tournament meta in the last patch?
Yeah, for me, I talked to Chess before the tournament. We had a little bit of a chat, and he advised me to take Vi because I wasn't sure on that one. That was like the flex deck that I wasn't sure I was going to bring. And for me, like bringing that deck was really good because it ate all the bans. So I was able to play my line pockets, or I was able to play Nilfgaard. That was at the point where I was quite happy with how the Chinese meta breaker was working for me. Things degraded quite quite abruptly after the qualifier because I hated that deck. And I went with the strategy of just banning NG. I just didn't want to see it. And I was really happy to bring Vi, so it was fine. I did face mostly the same list, so my bans were clear in every matchup. I didn't have to think about it. I just saw NG, I'm banning this, that's fine. Yeah. But I wanted to touch a little bit about the lineup that Patch brought to the Open. So I was surprised to not see NG from him. And I was kind of happy to see him bring something different. I think he was the only one who brought ST. And
Cam's brought it as well, yeah.
Cam's brought it, okay. Yep. Yeah, I was happy to see that deck. I know that's not a new deck, but it felt a little bit fresh than just seeing the same 4 lists.
Yeah, I think Patch's idea was to be like quite good into Nilfgaard, right? And it seemed like Patch kind of got it right because I think he was probably had a pretty good matchup into Tailbot in the finals and just got a little unlucky, right? Some things didn't quite go his way. Tailbot played really well as well. And those two things you can lose favored matchups because those things go against you. But generally speaking, I think Patch actually read it correctly that Nilfgaard was actually not as good as people thought, and it was also more targetable than even I thought was probably the way to go. So yeah, I think Patch was probably the one who got the lineup right. I think Tailbot just not only did he play really well in the final, but he also things went his way, right? But yeah, I tend to agree that outside of Patch and maybe Cam's, it was pretty stale the thing.
I would say that the tournament did gift us with some glorious gems, including YOLO Gem. And this is where I realized that the Gwent community are miserable bar stools, because apparently a bunch of people were like, oh, it's so BM that he's singing and having a good time while playing Gwent. This guy BMing by jamming. I'm like, What? How is it BM to listen to music? And I do not understand the Gwent community sometimes when that was allegedly him BMing his. But I was like, nah. It's just you could see from that set he was completely tilted in the first 2 games. He got the draw. He put his jams on. He had a good time, and he used that to restore his mindset. It wasn't anything about his opponent at all. But yeah, some miserable people in the Gwent community were not team YOLO jam. It also gave us Specimen referring to Gravesh in his cast as Colin, and I cannot, like, in my head I cannot put the fact that Gravesh's name is Colin like together. It doesn't fit. You know, it's like I want 2 jigsaw pieces from different puzzles. There's like Gwent Gravesh and then there's Colin. So yeah, for me, from a casting perspective, I had a lot of fun. We did an alternative cast on this channel, for those of you who aren't aware, and this is where I can then shamelessly promote the YouTube. I meant to tell you guys to go follow TLG on YouTube because the alternative broadcast will be up there. But like from a like that perspective, casting in that, it was a great tournament. But I feel like most tournaments are great tournaments from casting perspectives, so it doesn't really matter what the meta is like, unless every game's like the same. I guess that's one of the problems that sometimes you get.
And Skellige, right?
Yeah, that is true. Our last topic is upcoming qualifiers. So moving on from the past qualifiers, we have top 16 and then top 64 going into open number 2. And top 16 is what, next weekend? So we've got a week to figure out the meta.
Very soon after the patch, by the way.
So then the question becomes, you know, how do you feel about that tournament meta? I feel like it's going to be very broad, top 16. And I think top 16 usually kind of dictates a little bit what people bring to top 64. Like the people who aren't top 16, they watch the top 16 and they think, oh, this did well in top 16, I'll do this for top 64, right?
Yeah.
But if you're going to call it now, what do you bring?
Oh, it's so tough. Like I mean, it's like I don't even know what to play on ladder right now. Like there's just so many things to try out, and I have it's tough one because the people at top 16 actually they've got to be the innovators for lay the stage for the rest of the season, because as you mentioned, like quite often top 16 people have a look at it and go, okay, so this worked for this guy, this worked for this guy, this didn't work, and then they bring that and they kind of like improve upon that potentially for the top 64. And you know, people on ladder often end up you know copying that on ladder as well, and it ends up changing how the scene of Gwent can be. So I don't know what I would run right now. Like it's too early in the patch. I think like I really have no idea. I really don't.
I think I would target Vi, personally.
I was gonna say something similar. I think I would go for a Kelly Vi target where you just bring like decks with like lots of tall punishes and some locks and things. And yeah, because I think AQ people are going to be scared to bring AQ because of Fall Test, right? So people are going to want to bring White Punish because of that. And then you're forced into bringing Kelly or Vi, and both can sort of be targeted together. Question is are their 4 decks good enough to do it? I'd have to like actually brainstorm and see if it's possible. If not, then I guess you just go for the standard, bring the best 4 decks. But
that's the what all the 4 decks right now.
Best 4 decks right now would probably be like Full Test, some sort of monster deck, Full Test monsters, some sort of Skellige deck, and then probably it's tough on the last one. It'd be
some sort of monster deck, some sort of Skellige deck, so basically just decks from factions.
No. I think that from Skellige you can actually bring Witchers and then you tack in Axie or Irden and something like that, and another Tall Punish, and you should be fine against Vi. So that's a viable thing that you can do.
I'm not sure witches can beat Vi with like it. I don't know. It'd have to be. It'd be interesting. I guess they can tack in spores easily, right? Because they run portal, so that'd be nice for them. Witches.
See, this is where it gets tricky because you have to. I mean, if you're playing top 16, you have to think about what is it everyone else is going to bring. Can I target it? Or do I play something different because I'm scared of targeting? There's like this many variables, and top 16 only has 16 people, right? 16 isn't that many people to make a choice.
Next weekend.
Next weekend.
So people have to test all this, because the thing is like I think Full Test is good. So the question is how good is it? Is it good enough to bring? Is it good enough to target, or is it too good to be targeted and everybody has to bring it? I don't think it's quite that good. And then the question is it worth bringing it at all if it's like
Quite
not
easy,
that good?
like with white punishes, people
Huh?
bring.
But it's kind of like Vi, like it depends on how you build it, right? But if you build it like Vi, you just win round 1, bleed round 2, don't care that you go down a card, and then just win a short round 3 a lot of the time. So like, there's different ways you can build full test because, like,
I mean, it sometimes it depends on how much carry you get, because it's not always that simple just to win a card down, even if you have all the carry, because a lot of decks can actually outpoint that. Like, for example, Skellige, for example, they get to keep their ice for round 3. That's already like in points equivalent to your commanders in a way.
can be, yeah, for sure.
So
Mhm.
it's not always that easy.
Yeah, it's
And-
it's an interesting one for sure.
And one thing that does happen in tournaments, I've noticed, especially when they're this close to a patch, people who are unsure, they fall back on what they know. You know, and that happens quite often is if people are like with this conversation about, you know, is full test good enough? Is full test not, is that not going to work? You know, if it's a new deck, then people tend to be unsure. So they might fall back to things that they, you know, things like, you know, Warrior Skellige, things like, well, Line Pocket's not really going to happen, but Vi, a deck that people are comfortable with, Witcher, and are a deck that people are kind of, they've known it in the meta enough that they would be comfortable piloting it, as opposed to something brand new where you don't know all of the variables. And I think that's where you then see the people who take risks and the people who innovate in Gwent is in these top 16 moments who brings something fresh or something different. It doesn't always work for them, but the people who do that tend to be the people who do well overall, I usually find.
I mean, sometimes spicy lineups end up doing really well. Sometimes they kind of fall flat, but they definitely throw people off a lot of time because, you know, you kind of ask yourself, what do I even ban here? What do I queue on this coin? And how do I need to bleed this deck? And, you know, all those questions. When you bring like standard decks and people kind of know, okay, this deck, I need to do this needs to happen. I need to bring this on this coin, and it's kind of like a paint by numbers type of thing where you can throw people off with like unique decks, and then people just they start misplaying because they just don't know how to approach these decks quite often, which can sometimes be quite beneficial.
I think this upcoming qualifier is the one where you have the most benefit from scrimming because, like, it's such a new patch, right? So if somebody does decide to just like scrim for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, whatever it is, and just really try and work out what the best decks are, what kind of like reasonable lineup they could bring, you could actually get some, like, you might have like a really big advantage over the field. The downside to that would be it's kind of hard to guess what other people are going to bring, right? Like, you also need to keep an eye on the ladder meta and see what people are going to bring. Because I think, to be fair, you'll have a reasonable idea of what people are going to think is a safe deck to bring, like safe lineup to bring. And then if you've actually putting in lots of hours now is a lot more worthwhile than putting in a lot of hours scrimming, say, in like 4 weeks' time, right? When the meta's already developed and people have just naturally learned the meta more by playing a lot, right? So for anybody who is playing in the top 16 and it's like really wants an advantage, I would say like try and like actually do like practice. Like, this is a good time to actually really do some scrimming. If you're ever going to do it, this is as good a time as any.
And Chezzy is available if you need a scrim.
No, Chezzy is not available.
Speaking of,
just dial 0900 King Ches.
Yeah,
and he'll
just,
scrim with you 12 hours a day, apparently.
Yep, I will send you my PayPal details.
yeah, speaking of patches, though, obviously we're going to be having next month the introduction of a new like series of expansion all grouped together as one expansion called, I believe it's called Place of Power, I believe. Which, yeah, coming out soon. So I was actually very surprised to see a patch of this magnitude right before a expansion coming out. I'm not sure what you guys, what do you guys think about the expansion? You guys hoping for anything specific? What are your thoughts on upcoming?
Nilfgaard soldiers.
Rod, I'm sure Rod is probably just wanting vampires, right?
Yeah, I want vampires.
Vampires. What do you think of? Have you tried vampires this season at all? Have you experienced at all with it?
No, I want to try them out because I think they might be something. I'm scared of all the veil that might be in the meta, but
Veil. I always keep saying that. I think what vampires need is they need the leaderability of Bloodscent to just say have a passive ability that bleeds of yours, ignore veil. Like, just give it a passive, ignore veil.
Oh, so you can bleed Veil units with that
Yeah.
leader exclusively. I think like they could do interesting things like that. You know, where Veil is still useful to deny lock and other stuff. But then
I think what vampires need is to go away from bleeding and change to drain. That would be the way to make.
oh, so where
vampires
they like
level.
boost themselves by removing
Yes.
points.
Hmm.
It could be good.
It would be very, very strong. So you'd have to like change the numbers on them. But bleeding's just such a bad. Like it's just so hard to make it work. Bleeding's like so, like it's like as soon as you get to a point, you're just wasting bleed, right? And it's a very low
Yeah.
point.
And you
That
gotta worry about
point is so low.
interactivity, and you gotta worry
Yeah,
about Veil.
exactly. Whereas like drain is actually a really, really strong ability. So maybe only put it on like the really high vampires, and like the other ones like synergize by having more vampires on the board, right? They just buff themselves or whatever, or they damage by however many vampires, things like that, right? And then give like drain to these high end golds because drain's like super strong. And bleed's
I mean,
just trash.
They keep buffing cards and vampires like that. They add cards like Deathluff, and then they buff them. They buff this, and the problem is like as you mentioned, it's just vampire bleed is very awkward, and so much of vampire strategy revolves around bleed, and that strategy gets very disrupted by decks that are being uninteractive, like traps, or decks that have Veil, like you can just throw an invader or whatever into a row with Blood Moon, and then you got to play some fun little mini game of does your bleed hit the correct units or not.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like the opposite problem to Nilfgaard, where they keep just nerfing and taking away. In vampires, they keep buffing and hoping that it becomes good without realizing the flaws in the mechanics themselves. I think they kind of teased a little bit Place of Power, like the theme being around magic. So perhaps some sort of not Nilfgaard, Northern Realms mages, because Northern Realms they already have some like mage stuff.
Oh, NR mages.
So like NR mages maybe, but then I don't know because it's a difficult one. I don't think they can really necessarily introduce like brand new archetypes in the way that they're doing this expansion.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting one, like as you mentioned, because we're not getting as many cards as we used to way back when we're only getting what is like 26 cards. So like introducing a whole archetype with only 26 cards, it's not easy. So unless they do it over a period of time, it's not gonna be. You can't like just add like a whole new archetype, which I think though they're trying to do already with like the buffs will change to foglets and foglets, ancient foglet. It seems like they're trying to get the stage ready for the return of Dagon potentially, which may happen sooner or later.
That's
Dagon.
another. Yeah, I think weather's also a bad mechanic, kind of, but
I was
Again,
calling
it's
him
a-
Dagon too. Was it you, Spiro? I was calling him Dagon.
Oh yes, no, yeah, you were casting some Dagon gameplay or something, or I think it was really cast. I'm not sure.
Rhymes with dragon. Radu, I don't know. How do you feel about like archetypes with this format of patching?
Well, sure. I don't think they can bring in a new archetype like from zero, but maybe they can give some support for the existing ones. Like pirates, for example. I've been meaning to play pirates ever since the tag was introduced in the game. And I cannot play them. So
didn't you actually play some pirates once? Didn't you have a? Don't you want to share your experience with pirates?
I did experience with them many times. Most of the time in the pit because I was going to like 2300. But yeah, I did.
Sounds right.
Yeah, I think pirates is. Yeah, I mean you'd have to add a lot to make pirates good, right? Like,
I think Pirate's just missing like a card that glues it all together. Like for example, Blood Eagle, something that ties the archetype together and gets you the cards that all synergize with each other. That's the thing. They've got like these value cards like Croc, but they don't really feel like they all work cohesively
I
together.
mean, outside of like Croc and I guess Morkvag, like what good pirates are they?
Yeah, not really too many.
Like they have to add a lot, I think.
It's a tricky one because they're trying to tie in like ships and pirates together, and the ships are all right. Like the ships that we have, you know, you see Raiding Fleet get played. You see Light Longship and Uncrate, whatever it's called.
The only
the
reason you see ships is because of Raiding Fleet.
But that's the thing, like we already have ships, so it's just the pirate side of things that maybe needs adjusting.
I mean, the
and then
ships
some
are
of the
also
ships-
pretty underpowered, but Raiding Fleet is just absolutely broken. Like the card's so good.
But yeah, so pirates you want to. I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of tags in Gwent that don't really exist as archetype, like relicts.
Yes.
Relicts is a tag. It doesn't exist as a deck, but there are cards which are relicts, you know. And Pirates kind of falls into that category a little bit.
No mage decks.
I'll have you know, there was a relic deck way back when. It was a Mystic Echo, double unicorn Aguara relic deck where you Call of the Forest would you'd pick up a relic and then pick up a unit with a tag and then play a card with the same tag from deck, and you would do it on your Aguara into unicorn or Karanex and play like triple or quadruple unicorns in round 3. I don't know who came up with that idea. Whoever they were must have been a genius deck builder, though. I will say that.
I mean,
Oh dear.
that's probably the first time I've ever heard of a relic deck, not gonna lie. I mean, in beta we had a relic deck. In beta we had a relic deck. I remember beta there was actually I think Red made some beta relic deck. There was like some kind of...
Yeah, there was.
I can't remember how the deck went. I think I had ghouls and stuff. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was like carryover sort of thing, wasn't it? I think you could there was a card that buffed all relics or something, I think. If I remember correctly.
I think one of my concerns with the patch, or questions, is, well, if they're doing 26 cards, and you'd imagine there has to be a spread across the faction, you're not going to give, like, here's Nilfgaard's cards, you know, here's, like, buff one faction and leave everyone else until the next kind of iteration. Then you can't really introduce new archetypes unless you then also do a lot of adjusting to original cards by changing maybe the ways that they work. But then at that point, like, it's the same as adding new cards as changing unplayed cards. So, you're still doing an expansion in that regard, and then it's more work. So I don't know if we'll see much new with Place of Power. It's a weird system, right? Because you can't just be like, and here are all your, well, I guess soldiers as an example. Here are all of your relic cards, for example. Go have fun and play relics. It doesn't work in like 26 cards when you're adding maybe 5 cards per faction.
Yeah, I mean each faction in like 5 or 6 cards, so it's interesting to think of like how impactful those cards are going to have to be. But because I mean, obviously these expansions, like they're like 3-part expansions, so it can maybe takes time to build up there. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next like several months and where we end up going eventually.
So I think that this might be a problem we were talking about earlier. If they introduce only 5 or 6 cards, they're probably going to be top-end provision cards. They're not going to be bronzes. Yeah. Which means they just move the game more towards gold.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be good. So archetypes will probably get little to no support.
Yeah, I'm also a little bit concerned about that as well, because
the other thing I feel like right now they don't need I feel like they keep trying to add like new archetypes and stuff, right? But like we probably just have enough archetypes in the game right now. Like there's plenty of stuff you can do with what we've got. You just need to give them some support, right? Now, to be fair, it's not all the time, right? They did rework traps and make that like more of an all-in archetype, so they do that from time to time. But I would like them to just like try and make the archetypes that are somewhat like already built to try and make them good. Because like for example, Harmony, like again, it doesn't take. There's not a lot I don't think you need to do to make Harmony playable again, right? They just need to revert some changes, buff a few cards, and then Harmony can come back, something like that, right? Like, and that's kind of the way I think that I would like the game to be. I think they got Harmony. I think Harmony's like the perfect example of what they did, right? They got it to a point where it was really good, and then it was overplayed, so they nerfed it. But it's very easy to revert that back and make it playable. And if they can do that to every archetype, then they can like kind of just switch them in and out.
Harmony is very difficult to revert because a lot of that came because of that leader ability, right? Being able to play like.
Yeah, I mean, you just bring the leader back, right? Like it's
that leader, like that goes against it is the new design philosophy, right? Like they said that
they change their design philosophy all the time, right? So it's not like it's out of the question. They just go, oh, okay, well, this month we're changing our design philosophy again and bringing it back. It's like, yeah.
Well, the issue is like playing 2 cards in one turn, so you just make it so when you play the leader, you discard a card or something like that, and then you can't play 2 cards. Instead of playing your card, you discard it.
I think that would be
some nonsense like that. Some nonsense loophole that lets you.
I mean, you could just buff Harmony so you don't need the leader ability. It probably need to be buffed a lot, but like I don't see a problem with bringing back that leader ability. It's like you can't really abuse that leader ability too much, right? It's just like the only way is White Waters, right? Waters is probably the way to do it. But,
so
like, it's not like super oppressive playing 2 Waters.
But they do have double cross, and double cross still plays 2 cards in 1 turn. So their philosophy is not 100%. It's like partial.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I
Like
guess-
I feel like they call it a design philosophy when it suits them, right? Like that's their argument for changing something, and then they change it back and say, "Well, we've changed the philosophy." It's kind of like,
Radu,
like I have like they can build the game however they want. It's like kind of fine.
Radu, you're not playing 2 of your own cards in 1 turn. One of those cards is your opponent, so obviously it's completely different. You know, if you were playing 2 of your faction cards in 1 turn, that would be too strong. But if you play your opponent's cards, it's different. And if they happen to be the same faction as you, it's still not your card, so it's totally
You know what the funny thing
different.
about that is? It's so funny when Nilfgaard just like plays Masquerade Ball, then goes then goes leader into Neuromance and just 2 cards in 1 turn. Now you can't answer Masquerade Ball because I just procced it in 1 turn. Haha.
But Masquerade Ball's garbage now, so it's one of those things.
Right.
Here's a question: do you think this new form of patching, where we get these like card bundles, is better than having the big drop expansion and then nothing for half a year?
I tend to like that they're getting more consistent changes because I really didn't like these big droughts where there's a big hype, big expansion. Everyone's like playing Gwent again for like a few weeks, and then it just slowly dwindles down, and then new content, and then it dwindles down. It's nice to have like a more consistent flow. I do kind of wish there was still like more. I know it's kind of, I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it, but I do wish there was like just more stuff to do and try out, but not sure how they would end up going about doing that.
So in terms of balancing, I think it's better to have smaller expansions. We don't want to have another midwinter update, so I tend to like those.
So I think it's better for the game in terms of like viewership and things like that. From a personal point of view, I actually like perform better when it's like kind of a stale meta. Like just from like an actual performance point of view, and I enjoy the game more when I'm actually performing better. But from that point of view, like it's probably a negative for me. But as a whole, I'm not against it. I think it's probably a good change for the game. It's just yeah, I think it's positive for the game in general.
Yep. Cool. I think that's fair. Well, I think that about does it for the Zwei Null. Look at my lovely German accent. Zwei Null TLG podcast for this week. So lots of love to Radu and Chezi. Do you have any shout outs or things you want to promote? This is your moment.
No, I definitely don't want to give a shout out to either Sable or Inferns, so we can just skip me. That'd be great.
Radu?
Yeah. No shout outs from me.
I'd like to shout out to my mom who raised me and my dad.
Who also raised you, or is there a
and
difference?
all your teachers that told you were going to amount to nothing. This is me, a big F you to all of you. I'm on a podcast. I've made it.
And I would like to shout out Colin, the epitome of professional Gwent. Good old Colin.
Colin's in chat, I think.
Yeah, we'll shout out Colin. You know who you are. Oh dear. So just to round things up, we do need to remind you guys, if you want to catch up with TLG on YouTube, you can subscribe on YouTube, and you can always subscribe on Twitch too. If you have more money than sense, that's an option. What was the other thing we need to chat? Oh yeah, the Flame and Cup. The Flame and Cup. So Quill and Cup has become the Flame and Cup for this season. So instead of them casting, apparently they just smack talk the players.
Isn't that what they do every month?
Yeah, but now it's officially being smack talk.
Oh, now it's official.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like it's.
So now you can't complain if they smack talk you. Before you could be like, I can't believe Quill said that about me. But now it's like, well, this is what I signed up for. And I believe that is later tonight with Bowman. Yeah, 8:15 CST Bowman.
Is otherwise known.
Oh,
and it's gonna be on this channel.
That's gonna be it's gonna be enjoyable.
You could sound more excited about it, Chezzy. Oh yeah, that's going to be enjoyable. Like that.
Yes. I could sound more excited about it. You're right.
Okay, so all we have left to do is decide who we're going to raid, and I believe there's someone streaming who is a big fan of the church, the carryover church, I believe he calls it. Have you heard about this?
Yes, Mr. Life
Yes.
Coach himself.
Mr. Life Coach and his Terra avatar. So until then, all we have left to do is we smile and we wave at the camera, and then eventually the stream ends. So smile and wait.
I'm gonna have to beat the women away with a stick after this, you know.